Hello, and welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Tessers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for so very, very many reasons. Um, what this is just an open conversation with myself and Olivia Candosia, who's an intern therapist, who will be joining us shortly. Um, I am in a different location than usual, as you may have recognized. Any of you who have watched this stream um, for a long time might recognize this location uh, from last summer. I am in northern Wisconsin at my wife's family's lake house and doing the stream from here. And Olivia will be at our office, which is located in Northbrook, Illinois, and is logging on. Um, so bear with us as we get this new setup figured out. Uh, I'm speaking quietly, and I think I want to. I have um, earbuds in, as you just saw me taking one out, and somehow that like magnifies my own voice or makes me worried that I'm speaking loudly and I'm out on a porch and not that there are people around. But I was trying not to be too loud. Anyway, this is not therapy hour. It's an open conversation where Olivia and I are going to just be talking about whatever it is that we're talking about, and we're of course doing our best to take into consideration who you are, you all who are watching this, whether you're watching this live with us now or those of you who might be watching this in the future. This is saved as a VOD on YouTube. I think I think Facebook and Twitch as well, but I'm not sure, and we might have like run out of storage or something. So I'll have to look into that. Um, but yeah, we're doing our best to take into account who you are to the best of our ability to guess and what you might be interested in and what you're hearing from us and how we're impacting you. Uh, for those of you who are willing and able to participate in the chat, we appreciate that because it gives us more information on which to base our guesses about who you are and what you're interested in and what you're hearing from us and how we're impacting you. Uh, we do our best to read out the comments that come in because we're streaming on three different platforms simultaneously, and you'll only see comments from the platform that you're on. So if you're watching on Facebook and someone writes a comment on the Twitch chat, you won't see that. So we're reading it out so that we're all on the same page and know what we're talking about. Please don't hesitate to chime in with anything at any point. Don't worry about taking us down a rabbit hole or off on a tangent. A, those things are not useful concepts in many cases, and this is one of those cases. And B, that's how conversation works. We're impacting it. Any human that is paying attention to any other human is impacted by what they see, what you hear, right? What you observe. So the things that I say, if you're listening to me, impact what you think and what you feel and what you do, including what you say. And the things that you say impact what I think and what I feel and what I do. Taking us into a different direction is taking us into the direction that you're where your thoughts are. That's how it's supposed to work. And that can be questions and answers. It can be any kind of. It's just a conversation. This is our equivalent of open office hours, basically, making ourselves available to talk about these things with anybody who wants to talk about them. I'm going to check real quick just to make sure that I've gotten the correct link over to Olivia. Um, we work with a private therapy practice called Effective Artistry. We do individual, couples, family, and group therapy with people in the state of Illinois and the state of Wisconsin. We also work with a couple executive functioning coaches who can work with people all over the world via the internet. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that it's important to say that I might not be saying. I think that's about it. Uh, this is I think maybe the first time that I've been in this situation where it's me solo, but someone is joining soon. I've done the stream many times just myself, uh, and it's easy enough for me to go off in that direction, just start talking about things. And I find myself right now being like hesitant might not be the right word. Mm, maybe hesitant is the right word. Like not as there's not as strong of an impulse to get started talking about something with the idea that Olivia will be here and want to be able to talk about whatever, and she is here. Hello, Olivia.
Hello.
About how it's an interesting position to be in, that I've done the stream by myself many times, and it's easy enough to just start talking about things. But I think this might be the first time that I've been like in this place where I wasn't jumping into just like saying whatever. So I was doing what I was doing, which is just saying what was on my mind, being authentic and talking about the experience itself.
Yeah.
Other
Sorry, you
than
cut
that,
off.
we just
I can't tell if you're cutting off or if it's my Wi-Fi. But
anybody who's here and able to comment in the chat, please let us know.
cool.
It looks smooth on my end. Is it just the audio that's cutting out?
Yeah, just occasionally you're going, but I got what you're saying.
I'm wearing head earbuds. Maybe if I put in the other one, I took it out because it makes my voice sound so much louder in my own
Oh, I know. When
head
I
to
wear
have
my
the earbuds in.
headphones, it drives me crazy. It takes like at least 5 minutes to adjust to hearing my voice louder like that.
Yeah, just trying to not be shouting, you know. Is the audio any better now that I've got the other one in?
Yeah, and yes.
Oh, okay, good. Well, there we go.
I'll
Anyway,
take it.
good to see you. How are you?
I'm okay. Lots of traffic going on and a big accident, and that was weird. Yeah, just so curious of what happened. Like 10 fire trucks and tons of ambulances just cutting off one half of the
Oh,
highway. I was like, oh my gosh. But
it's
happy.
unfortunate.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. But I'm here, happy to be here. Yeah, I don't know. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm hanging out. Been up here for about 3 days now. So over the weekend with my family, just hanging out and playing and relaxing, which is nice. As our kids get older, you know, they're having more and more things scheduled, whether that's like activities or birthday parties, but also just like, our oldest especially is hanging out with friends a lot. So when we're at home, we don't often get days where it's like all of us are together all of the day. So it's nice to have that. But also, I'm working up here. I'm working my regular schedule because we're going to be up here for a few weeks. Um, I'll be back in the office for the stream next week, but then back up here
Oh,
again. So
why?
just
Why are you coming back? And what's that story?
uh, well, because my family's going to be up here for like a month, and I didn't want to be out of the office for that long, so I wanted to pop down and check in and work for a few days from the office during that time. And then B, I turned 40 recently, about a month ago, June 6th. And as like a celebration, I'm having some friends and my brothers and their families are coming out to this place to hang out with us. And my younger brother, Devin, is coming into Chicago for work for a few days, like 5 days before he was going to be coming up here. So instead of flying back home to Utah and then flying out here again, I'm just going to pick him up in Chicago and then drive him up here. So
Great.
that's happening next Wednesday. So I'll be in the office next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then we're coming back up.
I'm jealous, but also happy for you.
Yeah, it'll be fun. That week I am actually taking off of work, which, for me is working as minimally as possible.
Yeah.
It's rare that I don't work at all in a given day or certainly a week, but you know, we'll be canceling sessions and meetings and things like that.
Nice. I don't know what to say.
Well, thank you.
I'm feeling weird because it's not like a Zoom call where you see just the face. I see like the blue background. And so it feels almost like we're
Oh,
cartoons. Um, I mean, there you
is
go.
that
That's a little,
better?
yeah, a little bit. Um,
Just kind of zooms in on us more.
yeah. I mean, whatever is fine. I'm just adjusting to it, so I'm just not used to it.
Yeah.
But do you like our
Well, I'm
pink
glad you
name?
said something. Yeah. I don't know how you made the change, but it's cool.
I don't remember how I made it either, so we're stuck with it.
Yeah, I wasn't here for the stream last week, so Olivia and Samira, if any of you weren't here last week to the stream, Samira is one of our other therapists that works at Effective Artistry, and I haven't watched the whole thing yet. I watched probably the first 20 minutes thus far.
Did you get
But you guys
bored?
had fun? No, I didn't get bored.
Yeah, we had fun. It's
I,
good.
I was just gonna say boredom is not something I experience very often.
Can we've talked about this a bit, but I'm still struggling to define what boredom is.
Mm, yeah, that's a good one.
And because I've been thinking about like other ways to connect with people, and I'm like, I feel like sometimes I'm really good at making people feel like they are interesting or like have something to offer. And I was thinking about making like a Craigslist post that's like, do you think you're boring? Talk to me. But I'm like, what the hell does boring actually mean? I don't know.
It's one of those words. I mean, I've explored it before with people because it definitely is one of those words that has multiple uses. It gets used to mean different things. So, for example, one version of bored is an emotional state. When someone's saying, I'm feeling bored, they're referring to a particular condition that they're in, an experience that they're having that what I would say is it's associated with a lack of eudaimonic joy. Um,
Eudaimonic.
Eudaimonic joy, yeah. But generally, I think it's the thing that
Wait, what does that mean?
um,
Eudaimonic joy.
so there's plenty of language about these different kinds of joy, but I like to use the old Greek eudaimonic and hedonic as two different types of joy. Hedonic joy being the joy of experience, the joy that like whatever the thing is in and of itself enjoyable. Joy is being elicited as a response to just what it is that's happening in a moment. Where eudaimonic joy is the joy of meaning. Eudaimonic, like EU is the prefix, which in
Mhm.
Greek is good, and then daimon, Daimon, like our word demon, meaning spirit. So good
Mm.
for the spirit. The joy of meaning, where what you're doing elicits joy because of what it means, whether that's in the sense of like it's getting you closer to something else that matters, or whether it's that it's like representing some value that you hold or whatever. So
Huh.
you can do charity work, and the experience of lifting the bags or doing whatever thing you're doing is not in and of itself enjoyable, but the experience is enjoyable because to you it's meaningful as representing this charitable thing. You're doing something that you like the meaning of it.
Interesting.
And as a general thing, I think I try to tell people that you need some of each in every day. Otherwise, things get out of balance. And what that out of balance looks like is different depending on which thing you're not getting enough of or any of whatever. But boredom is, I think, what this version of boredom, this like the emotional state or condition of being bored, I think what people generally would think about is like when you're sitting there and you don't have anything that you have to do and you're not sure what to do. You want to do something, but you don't know what. That version of boredom.
Uh-huh.
The kind of boredom that like kids will talk about. I'm bored right now. It's just
Right.
like, I don't know what to do. That I think, I think that is the result of a lack of eudaimonic joy, not having enough of like the joy of meaning, doing things that seem or are meaningful to you in some way.
Oh my
Uh-oh.
goodness.
Hello,
You're there. Hello.
Olivia.
Yes. I'm here. I'm here.
Hello. It does seem
Hello.
like there's something up with the Wi-Fi on your end.
On my end,
Strange.
it's your company's Wi-Fi.
Well, right. You're at the office. That's
Yeah.
unusual. I don't know. Another
I
version of boredom. Oh, go ahead.
I feel like I experience that one all the time. Of like,
Mm.
there's no meaning. That's what's happening.
Yeah, they're like, I could do this, but I don't even really want to. You want to do something, but everything you think of, it's like, no, not that though.
Yep, I just give up on it. We have
Yeah.
lots of conversations about this, Brandon.
But oh no.
What if I move into a different office?
I I hope it's not on my end. Again, if you're here on my end, it looks like my internet and my stream and everything is running smoothly, and that Olivia is freezing and popping in and out. But I'm
And
aware that
I'm
that could just be on my end, and that in reality, I'm the one that's freezing and popping in and out.
yeah, and on my end,
If
I
you're
look
here and
crystal
you're
clear.
able to participate in the chat, would you?
Oh my goodness, I think Brandon's gone. I was acting like he should be talking, but it's just me. Please comment and let me know if it's Brandon the fool who is struggling. Oh, we're having trouble getting lots of pop-ups right now. Um, I've been experiencing a lot of boredom. Is that what? I'm all off right now. My brain is trying to figure out where we were just at. Yeah, I feel like I give up on a lot of things because there isn't immediate meaning in them, or if I don't understand the meaning right away, I kind of let go. I'm getting anxious about Brandon popping in, but he's the one who's got the login, so he can figure it out. And it's funny because I work with a lot of people on like perspective and changing perspective, um, and finding meaning in things or rewriting stories. But I am noticing I have a very hard time doing that. And so, I mean, a lot of my work is modeling to the people I'm working with that, like, I too am struggling with this. But it's funny, of like, man, I wish someone could work with me on helping me shift my perspective and narrative around things as much as I do for other people. And I've got Brandon to do that, but it's there's a reason therapists should have therapists, and we all should have somebody to talk to get this helpful. I can share one of the perspective things that I do at the behavioral hospital I'm at. I've got a bunch of photography cards, and they're all just different images of abstract images. And if you look close enough, you can see what they actually are, but that's not the point. And sometimes I will just have patients check in with one that resonates with, that relates to how they're feeling or who they are as a person. So it could be like a chain, and they're like, I feel locked up, or it could be a gumball machine, and like, I feel very sweet, but I feel trapped. And then we'll do a game where we tell a story. Hello.
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 Sorry, have you been going the whole time?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Um, and then we'll play a game with the cards, because these are different images, and we'll tell stories based off of the images on the cards. And so it doesn't matter what's actually on the card, it's whatever the person sees or they feel when they see the card and think. And then by the end, there's a whole story that we create. I was talking about perspectives and narratives and how you can look at something differently and tell different stories. So I was just talking about an
Cool.
intervention that I do.
Was that elicited by a comment, or you just talking about
It was elicited by thinking about how, gosh, what was elicited by?
I meant like as in, did someone put something in the chat that I'm not seeing? Okay.
No, it was something that we were talking about, you and I, about boredom and finding meaning. And I was talking about how I wish more people, I had somebody to like do the things that I do for people, and that you kind of do that for me, of helping me like reframe or look at things differently. And then I was like, this is the way I do it for people. And then I model for them. I'm still working on this too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that version of boredom. So there's that. There's the thing. I don't think it's an in the moment response of a lack of eudaimonic joy. I think it's something that like kind of in the same way that like if you don't eat any vitamin C, you get scurvy kind of thing. That
Mhm.
the less you're experiencing eudaimonic joy on a like day-to-day basis, the more likely you are and the more frequently you're going to experience that boredom. But in the moment, what that experience of boredom is thinking that the things that you are paying attention to are not worth paying attention to.
Mm.
It's that's why it's always like I could do this but no, I could do this but no, because there's always thoughts. You're always, it is, if you are conscious, you are aware of stuff, you're paying attention to stuff. It's if you identify that the things of which you are aware are not worth paying attention to, that's when you get into this like, oh, this is whatever.
I
That's
was
why it's
about
the
to,
lack of eudaimonic joy. It mean you are looking for meaning and you're not finding it.
yeah, I was about to ask how do you get rid of that, but then that's a silly question, I feel like.
Why? I don't think it's a silly question.
Um, how do you stop thinking this is not worth it?
Okay, well, so there's stuff you can do to prevent it, which is like doing the things to make sure that you're getting enough eudaimonic joy just in general, that you feel as though your life you're doing not like my life writ large has meaning in
Mhm.
some philosophical sense, but that I'm engaged in things which are meaningful to engage in
Mhm.
to
How would
some
you
extent.
encourage someone to do that?
Well, depends on the person. Some of it you can do like what you were talking about, right? That
Mhm.
meaning by definition is a thing that we make, right? Meaning what we're referring to is you can take thing A and you can take thing B, and then you can make a connection between those two things by thinking about it in a certain way. And that connection is what we call meaning. And even literally, in the lack of eudaimonic joy, I eat food, especially desserts. Uh,
Me too.
that does sometimes happen, and that doesn't make it better because that's hedonic joy. That people then sometimes are getting hedonic joy, where it's like this moment, this thing I'm experiencing. I eat something nice, or I take a nice bath, or get a massage, or whatever. And those are also important. If you're not getting enough of that, that causes its own problems. But those things don't feel meaningful. That's why we can say things like that, where we're criticizing ourselves for what we're doing. We're saying this is not a good thing. It doesn't make me feel good to think that I am doing this. You know what it means. So yeah, we can reframe things, create new meaning to show how what you're doing is meaningful. That's one possibility. Another is, and this is the one people tend to jump to first, is to start engaging in the things that you think of as being meaningful. You know, that there's things you're not doing that you think of as meaningful, and if you can do those things, then it's meaningful. And I'm saying meaningful in that shorthand way that people generally use it, but I mean like specifically joyfully meaningful. That, you know, dark clouds mean rain. So dark clouds are meaningful. We're talking about that it has meaning connected to your values, your desires, the things that you want to see or to have or to be or to do. Um, so that's to prevent it, but that's like a longer term thing, like that's what we're trying to do. But there are things you can do in the moment when it's happening. And really, it's just this: things are exactly as interesting as the attention that you pay to them. That's that's just a statement about how it works.
Things are exactly as interesting as the attention you're giving to them.
Mhm. The more attention you pay to something, the more interesting it is. The less you pay attention to something, the less interesting it is.
So when I'm getting bored with you, it's usually like I notice I'm listening, and then there's something that I either like fade out and don't hear what you're saying. Is that because my attention's gone elsewhere? Or like what?
But yeah, you can say because it's tricky there, like lots of variables, so we don't want to imply that thing X happened because of
Sure.
thing Y. Um, but yes, your attention is going elsewhere when less of your attention is being paid to a thing. And that's when we're using bored as a label of something else, that something is boring. What we're saying about it is that that thing is not calling my attention.
Say that again because I wasn't listening. I looked at the
When we're
comment.
calling something boring, we're saying that that thing is not calling my attention.
Mhm, mhm.
We're just saying it's a thing I'm not paying very much attention to.
Yes. You know, for a second, okay. So the other night I went to karaoke with my brother, and his friend groups. Did that once and it was very fun. And then I sang again a couple of songs, and I had this weird moment where like people weren't talking when I was singing, and so that meant like they were paying attention to what I was doing. But inside I felt weird because it was just quiet and there wasn't chatter. I don't know what I'm trying to get at, but it was a very interesting experience to like have the attention all be there. I don't know, Brandon. That
Well,
felt right.
I agree that that's likely what happened. If we want to be specific and precise, we can point out that everyone going quiet implies that all of their attention was on you, or that that's what you said. That means all the attention is on you. that it means that to you without knowing for sure that that's what it means. But I agree that that's the likeliest, the most reasonable interpretation to walk away with is like, oh, everybody stopped talking because they wanted to listen.
Yeah. But it was weird. It's really weird.
Why? Weird
Uh,
for you?
a little bit because I don't know. The feedback wasn't like, I don't know. I guess I wasn't I don't know, Brandon. It was just weird. I'm
Hmm.
having a hard time.
Okay. Well, there was a comment. I know you paused and read that. It says, "Holy cow, there's the crux: finding others who find meaning in the activities that I find meaning in." And that is true. Actually, we could, if we wanted to like oversimplify things, we could say like, if you do that, if a person is regularly interacting with other people and they all find the same meaning in the same activities and they're engaging in those activities together, that person is happy. Point
Mhm.
blank. Period. Um, Now, how do you find those people? And the best way to do that is to engage in the activities you find meaningful in ways that are visible at the very least, but at best in ways that put you in proximity with other people who are likely to find those same activities to be meaningful.
I do love finding like people who have like the watched the niche TV shows I watch or comedy things that I watch. But I found that on TikTok, the algorithm listens and follows you and whatever. And I'll like watch this comedy show and then it's all that's popping up. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't want my whole life to just be this comedy show. So then I start skipping it so it doesn't think that that's the thing I want to watch. But I feel like I'm trying to mess around with my interest to, I
That's
don't
funny
know.
because you're framing this all as like an attempt to interfere with the algorithm, but what you're doing is just what it is, right? Like if something's interesting to me, I pay attention to it. If it's not interesting to me, I
That's
skip
true.
past it.
That's
Like
true.
you don't have to deliberately intervene. It's trying to follow what you actually find interesting or not.
Right. That's funny.
But look, we can tell anybody right now, take your hand and just look at it
Hmm.
very closely in a lot of detail. And as soon as you start to do that, if you actually dedicate a lot of your attention to just looking, you'll notice like creases and lines and ridges and colors and whatever. And it becomes interesting. The more
Fascinating.
attention you pay to it, the more interesting it becomes. To me, I think that's very meaningful in the way that we talk, especially about other people.
Hmm.
Other people are exactly as interesting as you pay attention to them. There is
Hmm.
no such thing as a boring person. There's just a person to whom you don't pay much attention. And our attention is called, when we are using that phrase, something calls your attention. What we mean is without any conscious thought or intention that involving like, I want to or should or am going to pay attention to this thing, your attention just goes there without you having any conscious impact or whatever. OMG, the algorithm is engineered to make me believe that it's delivering a community of others who find meaning in me. That's why it's so addictive. Well, yes. Also, social media in particular is one of these things where like cause and effect, I think, gets reversed. People will talk all the time about like, oh, everyone's on social media, so people aren't making real relationships and whatever, whatever, right? Like relationships are worse because everyone can do X, Y, or Z on social media. Where I think it's the opposite. Like right now, you can survey any number of people and you will find some people that don't engage with social media at all or not very much. Like interview 10 random people on the street and more than one of those people will not be someone like they won't do anything with social media, especially when it comes to talking about kids, teenagers. We talk about how they like to use social media and now they're not doing other things, whatever. No, we eliminated the spaces for them to interact with each other in person, face to face, doing these kinds of things. We ate up all of the resources, like their time, attention, energy, and whatever is going towards academics and other activities and things like that. When it's not going towards that, it's going towards like news about what's happening in the world and whatever. And obviously, when people are hanging out with each other, their attention goes to each other. But there's this term third space, the third space that's not home and it's not work, the third space where people gather together and socialize. Where is that for teenagers?
The phone? What?
I mean, no, literally, yeah, it doesn't really exist. There were malls were third spaces for a while.
The train
That
tracks.
was 30 or 40 years ago. Yeah. So we crave social interaction. Is
Mhm.
social media as beneficial, as fulfilling, as satisfying as in-person interaction? No. But when you don't have that, it's better than nothing.
Where did all the frozen yogurt shops go? It used to be such a craze.
I mean, there is an argument to be made, certainly, that like by making things so accessible conveniently uh, through technology, internet, phones, digital media, whatever, that's disincentivized these third spaces because, without having to pay the cost of physically going somewhere, I can get a watered down version of interacting with people.
Did I tell you about my cousin's boyfriend who made his town have a Taco Bell because he was in a town hall meeting advocating for like he's like they're like, should we have a Taco Bell? And he's like, listen, guys, a lot of us like youth aren't moving back here because it's kind of boring here. But a Taco Bell would be a really great thing because it would give us a reason to like come back. And they built a Taco Bell from his case that he gave. And
Interesting.
I mean, there's
Well,
more to this
someone
story.
was already trying to build a Taco Bell,
Yes,
right? Like
yes, yes,
someone
yes,
was trying to open a
yes.
franchise,
100%.
and they were deciding whether to allow. Not,
Yes.
not that he, which
Not
I get that, but the way you framed the story almost sounded as though no one was considering it, and he was like, "Guys, we need this," and the town was like, "Let's build a Taco Bell."
It's better that way, Brandon, to think of it.
That is more fun. It's a real what's his name? Harlan Hill, something Hill from the Music Man. Is it Harlan Hill?
Oh,
You have pool with a capital P and that rhymes with T and that stands for trouble. That guy, the con man who comes in and is like, you all need a band here.
I don't remember his name.
I know his last name's Hill. Anyway, doesn't matter. Um, yeah, no, people need other people, period. That's definitely like the only thing that makes humans more viable as like organisms than other species is the way in which we collaborate. The specifics of how we communicate and how we can organize our efforts collectively. We can work on a scale that other things just can't, and with an adaptability and a flexibility to that scale that other things can't. Um, it's kind of a sweet spot, we're in that middle there. There's like ants or whatever that can get so many of them working together, but the communication is limited. So when things change, there's limited ability for them to be like, oh, new plan, everybody, we're doing this instead. Like they don't innovate. And then other things which are like more innovative don't collaborate as
I
much.
think ants are pretty innovative.
Interesting. What do you mean?
I'm thinking about all their little like the their paths and they all go to one spot and they have their little hills and their little communities underneath. Maybe I'm just imagining this fantasy world of what young Olivia thought ants did, and that's what's
Well, I mean, there's always going to be humans project. That's what we do. The only thing we know is our experience. So we project from that onto other things. We anthropomorphize ants and whatever.
Bug's life.
Like, ant hills just get wiped out all the time. Like it's just they haven't invented any technology. You know what I'm saying? Like ants
Therapy.
haven't discovered agriculture. We're like, oh, and I
Science.
actually now that I say that, I think there is some like weird species of ants that you could argue like farms something. Anyway, whatever. Uh, Point is, yes, we are evolved. Everything about the way we are built, including our nervous system, and the brain is part of the nervous system. It's not the mind. It's an organ that is part of the nervous system in the body. Uh, is wired to operate in community and collaboration with other people. If you cut it's literally like inhumane torture to cut a person off from all contact with other human beings. So if you're in a room by yourself and you have a way to be able to like see what other people are saying and say things that other people can read and whatever, then of course you're going to do that. Why wouldn't you? And by trying to get you to not do that instead, that doesn't make things better for you. That makes it worse.
Say that again. Say that again.
That if you're in a room by yourself, there's not other people around you, and you have a device that allows you to see what other people are saying and say things that other people at least can potentially see and respond to, then of course you're going to be doing that. Why wouldn't you be doing that?
Yeah.
And if you were to stop doing that, things would be worse for you, not better.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's not to say that there aren't other things that you could do theoretically that would be better than doing that, than using
Hmm.
social media. But abstaining from social media is not the answer. That'll make things worse for you. And we have this idea, it's very related to boredom actually, that like if things get bad enough, then you'll solve the problem, which is just a blatant disregard for the reality of what it is to be a human, that like people die. So, when things get so bad that they're fatal, no, we don't always figure it out and overcome. Like it is not true that if things are bad enough for you, you will solve the problem. The worse things are for you, the less likely you are to solve the problem.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's not
Yikes.
to say that there's nothing worth looking at changing, but if you want to do something different, if you want to get anybody to do anything any differently than they are doing it in any sustainable way, yourself included, you have to understand that what they are currently doing is the best option they have, and you have to give them a better best option, not tell them that the best option that they currently have is a bad one and that they shouldn't do it.
Hmm.
We call that abstinence, and it does not work. I mean, anecdotally, everybody knows that it doesn't work. We have mounds and mounds of research that it doesn't work. You got to give them something better. I don't
Hmm.
want people using heroin, so I got to give them a better thing to do. And that means that I have to recognize that doing the heroin fulfills some function. It's doing something for them. And if I want them to stop doing it, I have to find something else that fulfills that function
Hmm.
or eliminate the need for that function to be served at all.
Hmm. I'm thinking
Yeah.
about how hard it is for some people to identify the function of something or how things serve them.
Oh, sure. And it's difficult. It's narrative, right? It's like all analysis. We're trying to come up with our ideas about what is this? Why
Hmm.
would someone do this, X, Y, or Z? But the first and most important thing to do, this is why in the work we do as therapists, we do not use the deficit model because the deficit model stops all of that. If you allow as an explanation for why someone is doing something, the possibility that, well, that's a bad thing to do and they're just not capable of doing better, then there's no reason to explore what's the function of it. There is no function. It's just a bad thing to do. They're deficient in some way that makes it so they do this bad thing, which is not the case. You have to look at it. There's a cost, there's a value. The cost may outweigh the value. Maybe it doesn't. The cost could be so high or in ways unsustainable, even though the value is worth it. But we have to identify what the value is. This idea that people do stuff that has no value is absurd
Hmm.
in any repeated way, right? We sometimes think something will have value and we do it for that reason, and then it turns out it isn't. But humans adapt fast. We stop doing that stuff. If we continue to do something, there is a value there. It doesn't mean it's a good thing to do. The camera's like zoomed in more so again. That doesn't mean it's a quote unquote good thing to do. It just means that it has a value in addition to what the cost is. And if we recognize that, then we can at least start to speculate, explore what might be the potential value here.
Hmm. Hmm.
And some things, by the way, that can't be allowed for that, escape and distraction, you can't allow those as explanations. That's just deficit model.
Okay. You need to be more specific.
Well, things
And
like
that is,
that, if this is an escape or a distraction, then what we're saying is the only function it serves is to call my attention away from the thing that I am escaping from or being distracted from.
mhm.
But literally anything that is not that thing can serve that function. And you're paying attention or putting resources into this one. So even if that is part of the function it serves, there's always more because anything could be that. Video
Mhm.
games are just a distraction. They are not. They cannot be just a distraction. Anything could serve the function of being a distraction. Looking at your own palm could serve that function. There must be other value to it besides that, even if that is
Right.
part of it.
And it can be a trial and error to find out what the function is. Like we can make our guesses.
Um, Kind of. Yes, you make your guess, and then based on your guess, you come up with the answer to the question that matters, what's worth trying next. And then you try something. So there is an element of trial and error, but it's not to figure out what the function is.
Okay.
It's just to figure out what you can do that will make the change happen. Let me try this instead of the heroin. And if that works, then it works. And if it works to some extent, in some ways, some element, then it works in that to that extent or those ways, those elements. And then you add on. And if it doesn't work, you go with something else. It's rare that you're going to find anything, especially with stuff that's big enough that people are making a conscious effort to change it. It's rare that you're going to find anything that you can replace just one thing for one thing.
Sure.
Like anything you're doing a lot of that has a high cost that you don't want to pay health wise or financially or whatever it is. If you're still doing a lot of it despite some knowledge that like, oh, this is bad and I should, try not to do it for whatever reason, it almost definitely is serving a lot of different functions for you. And it's very unlikely that there will be some easy, simple, like, I'll do this instead, and that covers all my bases. Otherwise, it'd be very easy to quit smoking.
Right. I'm even thinking about sitting here in the stream and like, sure, sometimes I got bored, but there is still it's serving me in some way, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Boredom is not. Let me see if I'm following that. That the original thought would be that if something is boring to me, then it isn't serving me.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. Which is why I go into like a paralysis, it seems, when I try and pick out like a TV show to watch.
Well, okay. When it comes to entertainment, then yes, something which is not entertaining is not serving the function of entertaining you.
Sure.
But we do tend to have a belief in this culture. We overestimate our own thoughts and feelings, not in terms of whether they're valid, but in terms of to what extent they match reality. That everything that happens in my life, everything I do and everything that happens to me and around me and in response to me really just boils down to what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling. If I think the right way, feel the right way, then I can do anything and I'll be successful.
Sorry, Brandon.
That's okay. And that's flawed thinking, obviously. And one of the things that shows up as a result of those flaws is this: we overweigh our own, like, I want to be careful here because I don't want to there are some narratives where it's like, hey, whether you like something or not is irrelevant, and it's not irrelevant. But whether you think of something as being valuable is different than whether it is valuable. Whether you think of something as being safe or dangerous is different than whether it is safe or dangerous. And all we have are our thoughts, and we have to rely on those. But
could we argue that everything is valuable?
Well, yes, in the way that I'm using the word, everything is value because there's value. Value just means impact.
Yeah.
And so some impacts are like you die, but that's still a value, right? Like, but mostly in these conversations, we're using it in a shorthand way to say like value that you desire, that is beneficial to you.
Right.
And in that case, no, definitely not everything is valuable. But the funny thing is, like, of course, there are boring things that serve you. Like, to the office, was that entertaining to you to drive to the office? You drove to the office earlier. Was that entertaining to you to drive to the office?
Not terribly.
Yeah, but it still serves a purpose.
Sure. But I'm still searching for like, what song do I play to make this like a valuable or like entertaining experience for me?
Entertaining, enjoyable, different than valuable, right?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Uh-oh.
I'm here.
I froze again. Of course, we would rather be entertained than bored, of course. And so, yeah, we look for, and that includes that, like, we collectively as a species, we innovate, we invent things that make it so that things which would otherwise not be very interesting or entertaining, we can be interested or entertained while we do that. And music is part of that. And when we're talking about travel, podcasts and whatever, so of course you're looking for that stuff that you can do. That makes the experience more enjoyable. And this gets into a thing that, like, I don't know, you tell me if I'm like going too far afield. People think of time as a resource, and it's not a resource.
Mm-hmm.
just like space is not a resource, it's just a thing through which we move. Our physicality is the limitation that we associate with time. You can only be in one spot at one moment, but that doesn't make time the resource. It makes your presence the resource, you know.
Sure.
So we can do way more. In fact, at any given moment, you're doing way more than one thing at a time.
Mhm.
And it is entirely possible to add on more things that you do that do not detract from the other things that you're doing at the same time.
Okay.
So it serves a purpose for you to drive to the office.
Mhm.
You can also add on listening to a podcast or music or whatever else that is entertaining and at least potentially valuable in other ways, serves other purposes without detracting from your drive to the office.
Sure.
So that's not, because people have this tendency to think, well, if you focus on this, then you're paying less attention to that and it gets in the way. But like talking doesn't stop you from breathing and walking doesn't stop you from
Right.
swallowing, or, you know, like
The thing
there
can
are
still
limits onto how much we can do, but we can do things at the same time.
sure.
So yeah, we're always trying to cram in as much as we can.
Ah,
There's nothing wrong with that.
there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, what would be wrong with trying to do as much as you can do that's of value?
Exhaustion.
Right. So you want to try and do it in a sustainable way. Because to really do as much as you can do incorporates not just looking at this moment, but the entire lifespan. If I can do 10 things in this hour, but that leaves me only able to do one thing in the next hour, or I could do five things in this hour and five things in the next hour and five things in the following hour, then where do I cram in more? Sustainability is still a desire to be able to do more.
I
It's
always
just not
want to do
time
more.
bound.
But Brandon, I am maybe I'm wrong, but I always feel like I'm the only one who wants to be. No, this is wrong. I've decided I'm
Well,
wrong.
finish your sentence anyway.
I was gonna say I've been feeling like, doesn't anybody else want more? Like, why is everyone just
Yes,
content with
nobody's
stuff?
content. Nobody's content.
There's an illusion that people are content though with things, and I am like, I feel
It's
like,
a narrative.
yeah, I look around and I'm like, how do you not want more? But you're saying that everyone wants more.
Yeah, well, that's the fun thing. We say stuff like that, right? In the discourse, culturally, we'll say like, "Oh, people are sheep, but people are so content." And then we also talk about the rise of depression and anxiety, and everybody's complaining about everything. So is everybody really content with everything, or is everybody really dissatisfied with everything? Because it cannot be both.
Right? Probably dissatisfied.
Yes, there isn't an illusion that other people are content. There is a narrative. If you look at anybody, if you observe anybody, you don't see. Name to me one person that you've ever interacted with on any like meaningful level, a person that you can like actually make a statement with some confidence about what they are or are not content with, that is content with everything.
I can't.
Yeah, that's not a that doesn't exist. But we have a story that that's how most people are. Sometimes we look at that story and we're envious of those people. Like, oh, I wish I was happy like everybody else. I wish I knew how to like be successful like everybody else. Sometimes we look at those others with disdain. Like everybody's sheep, everybody's just got their head in the sand. And really, again, having that narrative serves a purpose. But
And the purpose is
well, depends, and it can be different in different ways. Something one of my weird, literally yesterday, yes, even while I'm like on vacation with my family, I'm still thinking about this stuff. Yesterday, as I was walking from the house to the lake, because I had to walk up to get a towel for one of my kids, and I was walking down and had like 30 seconds of not talking to people, so I'm thinking instead. And I was trying to like plot out, plot's not the right word, design the like mathematical equation for this concept that I've been trying to talk
okay.
about, which is that things are exactly as popular as they are useful.
Okay.
Concepts, ideas, tools, they they spread in proportion to the extent that they are useful to people. The modifying factor there is the more powerful someone is, the more of an ability they have to make something spread that is useful to them. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm thinking about you and talking to you earlier today and you being like, I don't care how many people like follow me or like, I don't know. I'm thinking about that. And if you've got such powerful messages, Brandon, why are they not popular?
Oh, yeah, there's all kinds of reasons. But because they're not useful. I didn't say powerful. I said useful.
Useful. Useful. Okay.
Yeah. And part of what makes them useful is that they're articulated in a way that is accessible and usable to people. Part of what makes it useful is that somebody has heard of it. But
Yeah.
like if one person hears of it and it is useful to them, then they spread it. You ever come across something that was really useful to you and never like shared it again with anybody else? It's pretty rare.
Yeah.
Everybody has a phone because those phones are useful to us.
Yeah. I'm going to read these two comments.
Sure.
The truly valuable thing is cake, especially chocolate cake. Everything else is valuable because I think the rest of the world thinks is valuable. And I think you're like me, Olivia. I judge myself as not having be enough. So I project that onto others. I might be projecting that onto you. My judgments being or begin with myself judgmental. I love judgmental that way.
Yes, that is true. If you judge other people in a certain way, you judge yourself that way. It doesn't mean you come to the conclusion in that judgment that you do with other people, but if you think it's possible to be a good or a bad person, you're evaluating whether people are good or bad. You're going to evaluate whether you are good or bad.
Yeah.
And you don't always come to the same conclusions, but you will evaluate on the same properties. If you want to stop worrying whether you're a bad person, you have to stop thinking it's possible for a person to be a bad person. It's the
Yeah.
only way.
I'm thinking about that chart of cognitive distortions and black and white thinking. And I was recently given feedback that I have very black and white thinking. And I'm thinking about how that's what we do as people, though, is like we
Yeah,
categorize.
of course.
Um,
It's
like,
funny though. I'm pretty sure you're referring to me, but if not,
no, I'm talking about
well,
my couples therapist, actually.
that's funny because you and I and Samira were talking earlier, and I referenced something as being black and white thinking. But the way to be able to recognize that there's no such thing or good and bad people is to recognize that that's irrelevant.
Mhm.
That people can do things that are good or bad. That I think what's being done is a bad thing. Whether or not the person doing it is doing it because they're a bad person or that it means they're a bad person is not the point.
Mhm.
It's useful to simplify and think of it in that way because if I see somebody do some bad things and then I just categorize them as bad person, it means person that I want to avoid interacting with, and I'm more likely that if I hear them say something, I'm going to probably be on the opposite side of it, that kind of thing. So it's useful. I'm not trying to say that anybody's doing anything, you know, unhelpful in that.
Then we should get rid of the word cognitive distortions.
Well, so let's talk about cognitive biases instead.
Okay.
Um, because it is useful for us to recognize that our thoughts, while useful or at least attempts to be useful, are not necessarily accurate.
Mhm.
And that's the point of talking about cognitive distortions or
Okay.
cognitive biases, is to say that thinking this way is having an impact. Now, we're wrong all the time. So
Mhm.
we often do things that actually do make things worse for us. We think things and feel things and take actions that result in things being less the way we would want them to be. And we want to be able to identify those things. That's the point, right? Being a human, we're always trying to evaluate. That's why we're thinking, why is this happen? What did happen that led to this thing, is so that I can then make adjustments, whatever adjustments I can make that make it so that things go more the way I would want them to go. So it is useful to be able to look at your thoughts and other people's thoughts and say it's distorted. Now, you're responding to it from this perspective that a cognitive distortion means it's a bad or unuseful thought.
Yes.
And so then because it might have utility, you're saying let's get rid of the term. But
And
it's
I'm thinking like deficit model too.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
this is one of the reasons the deficit model causes problems here. Like we'll start with the thing that more people are aware of, not necessarily everybody, but more people are aware of, that if you think that racism is like a personality characteristic, and obviously if you think that you think it's a bad one, then of course you want to eliminate it from yourself. And as long as you have not done that, as long as you think of yourself as still being racist to some extent, then you'll feel bad because you
Mhm.
think it's a personality characteristic that can be eliminated and you're going to strive to eliminate it. So either you'll just feel bad about having failed to eliminate it forever, or
Mhm.
eventually you'll come to the conclusion that you have. I'm not racist, right? That doesn't mean that it's eliminated, but you stop thinking that you are. And so
Mhm.
we encourage people to be able to acknowledge that, like, even if you think you're not biased, you still are. That's the
Mhm.
point of what a bias is. A bias is a thing that influences the way in which you think, despite your inability to recognize that it is influencing what you think. It is not possible. It is not a personality characteristic. It's not a thing that people can operate without. It is not possible to eliminate biases.
Mhm.
At the root level, we could say all of your thinking, no matter who we're talking to, everything, single thing that you think is biased based on the knowledge and information you have access to.
Right.
Like, how could you do otherwise?
Right.
How could you arrive at conclusions that require information that you don't have?
You
So
can't.
if you think it's a bad thing that can be eliminated, that actually makes the biases worse,
Damn it.
because then what you're saying is all the information I have is all the information that's relevant. I
Mhm.
have all the relevant information. I'm not making any assumptions, instead
Mhm.
of just acknowledging that, of course, you are biased. Of course, your thinking is distorted. It's not a contest of whose thoughts are more distorted or less distorted than other people's. Identifying it can be helpful, and it can be helpful both for ourselves and interpersonally to be able to point out, like, oh, I'm doing that thing again, and I can adjust for that.
Brandon,
There's
what are
still
your
other
things?
things. What are my things? Same as
Yeah,
everybody's.
I don't know. It feels like you've like mastered not having them.
Nope, that's an illusion. No, I have them. This
Yeah.
is part of why I say I'm wrong all the time. I only have access to the information I have access to. Most cognitive biases, if you really boil it down, it's funny, people are arguing in the literature about it because obviously there are incentive structures for people to identify and name this is a new cognitive bias. And then there's like meta analyses that are like, there's really only four, and everybody just keeps like applying them to more specific things in order to name it something new. I personally think it all really boils down to just there's one, and then it's specific applications. And the one is just we treat the information we have access to as though it is relevant, and the information we don't have access to as though it is not relevant.
Yeah.
Because if you treated the information you don't have as being very important, you literally couldn't do anything. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. You couldn't, like, you don't know if gravity is going to cease to exist 5 minutes from now. If you treated that as though it was important, that lack of knowledge as though it is important, then you can't move. You would have to, like, because you might fall, you might float up into the air, and like, assumptions are not active things. We use the word to refer sometimes to some active conscious things that we do, but assumptions and biases are not at the root of it. They're not active things. We're talking about things that happen that we notice after the fact.
Yeah. I'm thinking about like the phrase like the proof is in the pudding, or like, well, evidence has shown us this. Um I don't know why I'm thinking that, but that came into my mind of just like, but there's proof that like this is going to happen because
See,
this is how.
but something happening isn't proof that it will happen again. It is evidence that suggests that it's more likely that it will happen again.
Okay, that it's
And
more
again,
likely, sure.
in practical terms, and this is the way everybody talks about it and thinks about it because it is the practical version of this. In practical terms, yeah, somebody does something 10 times. Let's just operate as though that means they're going to keep doing it. Does it actually technically mean that they're going to keep doing it? No. But is it really worth like delving into the specifics and looking into all the different variables of everything every person does? Of course not. But we are focused, you and I, the people who are coming to the stream, the people who are coming to therapy, we are focused on very specific, small scale, like within narrow parameters, sets of thoughts and feelings and behaviors. And in those cases, yeah, it's really useful then to delve into how this is complicated and nuanced, and there's a lot more going on than just a simple thing. But no, it's not really like, because some of the things that I say often will get interpreted as though I'm being pedantic or whatever. They're like, does that thing cost $1, is it really just that they're telling you that you need to pay $1 in exchange for the? No, that's what it means. That's what it costs $1. That's what that means, right? We're not splitting hairs, even though it sounds like that's what we're doing. The funny thing is, it only sounds like that's what we're doing if you're taking what we're doing and applying it to other things that are not the thing we're talking about, which is the whole problem.
What do you mean?
It is useful for me if I run into, like, if I'm walking down the street and just a bunch of random people, whatever, and I see somebody coming up ahead and they punch some person next to them and they keep walking, just some random person that passed by them, I'm going to not walk by that person.
Sure.
I don't know why they punched that person. If I really wanted to like delve into it, who knows? Then maybe they know that person. They've had some interaction, whatever, whatever.
Okay.
None of that matters to me. That is not relevant. That person does not serve a function in my life that is worth thinking about beyond just like, well, I saw him do it once. So there is some chance that he'll do it again and do it to me. So I'm just going to make sure I'm not around when he does or whatever.
Mhm.
Right. On the other end of the scale, there's like, oh, this person who romantic partners, parents, children, but romantic partners is the, when I say romantic partners, I mean the people with whom you are building your life, not
Mhm.
people that you're dating or are interested in, you know, sleeping with or whatever. Romance and sex and all these things get conflated. To me, romance is constructing my, if I have a romantic connection with someone, it means I'm constructing my life in such a way that it is highly reliant on their participation in it.
Mhm.
Um, so anyway, then it's going to matter more, right? Like if my wife punched somebody walking down the street, I would not be like, well, she's just going to do that a lot. I'd be like, look, I'm going to talk about this and get into this and figure out what's going on here. I'm not just going to be like, yep, I'm staying away from that person.
Mhm.
So in practical terms, yeah, like when something isn't highly relevant to you, you don't need to delve into it in depth and detail. It is not possible to know everything. And we can have the value, I have the value of being understanding, of listening to people and being empathic. I do. I'm also pragmatist that understands that no, I don't, I could spend my entire life trying to just learn the names of 8 billion people and I won't do it. Right.
Mhm.
So that's not going to happen. It's a thing to aim for, not to accomplish. And you still have to make your decisions as best you can. So, in order, though, for people to feel as though to convince themselves that they have done that, that I understand people, what they have to do is take specific things and then make it as though that applies to a lot of things.
Mhm.
Person X did Y thing. That means they're a narcissist, and narcissists do all these other things. So now I understand that person. I understand all narcissists instead of being able to say like, well, that is a practical and useful way to think about it. Sometimes it causes us to make mistakes because we're wrong about things, but it is not the same as like that's literally true.
It makes me think of uh it makes me think of a lot of the social media pages for like looking for a good resource for a partner who doesn't have ADHD, who has a partner who does have ADHD, and a book for them to read to understand their partner better. And I think you've said to us before, is like, but it's so specific to the person that like you should just talk to them and ask them questions about their experience, right?
Of course, but that doesn't mean that looking for those kinds of resources or using those resources isn't also useful. In the same way that I would say that, like, if you have a child, like the specifics of how you parent and interact with that child are really going to vary from everybody else. That doesn't mean that it's not worth trying to read books about parenting and
Yeah,
children and
here's my
whatever.
problem. Why do I always just resort to like, there's a better way to do that? Like,
So this is the why I always drill down on cost and value,
mhm,
because it is pretty much always a true statement to say there's a more valuable thing that could be done. But it is also relatively generally true that the more valuable something is, the more costly it is as well.
mhm,
It's not across the board, but
mhm,
especially in the places where we're considering doing or not doing it. Some things are so valuable and so cheap that like everyone is doing it all the time automatically. It's not a thing that we're consciously like, should I? Breathing is so valuable and
mhm.
so cheap to do that
Cheap
nobody's
fear.
ever considering, should I breathe or not breathe? So when we're talking about a narrow window of stuff, and then the stuff that we're consciously considering is generally true that the more valuable stuff is the more costly. And we are flawed and we are limited. We are finite. So you have to choose where to spend that cost. I believe in being empathic. I do. I cannot. in any way that is meaningful, unless you really are careful in how you define that word empathic. I cannot be empathic to every person that theoretically exists that I don't even like
Uh-huh.
interact with or observe in any real way. If I attempt to do that, A, I'm diluting the resources that I could use to otherwise be empathic to the people that I am interacting with, or more likely B, I'm just constructing narratives that allow me to think of myself as being empathic without actually doing anything that meaningfully matches what that would mean.
Hmm.
So you just got to accept that, like, of course there's a more value, but more valuable isn't always possible.
Yeah.
You have to be able to afford that. And afford doesn't just mean if you have $1,000 in your bank account and your rent is $1,000 and it comes due tomorrow, you can't afford anything unless whatever thing comes up is more important than paying your rent.
Hmm.
So when you look and you're like, I have $1,000, I can afford this thing for $200. No, just because you haven't spent it yet doesn't mean you can afford to spend it. So yeah, is it better to talk to a person and work through it? Of course. Than to like read a book? Of course. If you had those two options and you could only do one of those two things, but you could do either of them, then talking to the person is going to generate more value for you. But A, you don't generally have to only choose one of those things. You can communicate with someone and be reading a book in order to help you communicate with somebody.
Hmm.
Other times, for whatever reason, you don't have the ability, you can't afford to communicate, whether that's because there's risk involved or whether it's because you work opposite schedules and don't have much time to get, or whatever. Everything that is useful is useful. And
Hmm.
anything that is useful, if you attempt to use it beyond the limits of its utility, has the possibility of making things worse. It might be ineffective, but it might actually make things worse.
Say that last sentence again.
Everything that's useful is useful.
Hmm.
Everything that is useful, when you attempt to use it beyond the limits of its utility,
Oh,
has the potential to make things worse. At best, it's ineffective. It doesn't do anything.
that feels
At
like
worst, it
duh.
makes things worse. What?
I said that feels like duh.
Yeah. So much of this is stuff that feels like duh when you point it out, but we just think about you and I. We live in a culture where people are regularly walking around just throwing out stuff like, oh, so and so's a narcissist, right?
Hmm.
As though that's like a simple, observable thing. The level of complexity, like that is a concept that was only developed within, I mean, our species is 200,000 years old, give or take, some debate, whatever, but roughly. The concept of being a narcissist and whatever that means has been developed within the last 50 to 70 years. I don't know the exact timing, but it's
Hmm.
Freud or post Freud, and that was, mid 20th century. Like it took humans hundreds of thousands of years to arrive at this concept of narcissism as something that might be useful. And now we're just throwing that around. And I'm not saying don't do that, right? Like I use the Pythagorean theorem. I mean, in reality, I don't have much call to use it, but if and when I do, I can and will use it. And I didn't have to invent that theorem. Pythagoras did that. I didn't even have to like find out about it or teach it to myself. I had teachers that did that. So now I can
Remind
just
me
use
what
it.
the Pythagorean theorem is again.
That's the a squared plus b squared equals c
Oh, right.
squared, right triangle thing. Yeah. People dedicate their entire lives to finding just like a bit of an edge of on a new concept. And then the next generation takes and builds on that and whatever. Anyway, that's great, but that has resulted in we're all walking around utilizing incredibly complicated stuff
Hmm.
all day long, all the time, without recognizing it as being complicated. And we want to treat it like it's simple. And then someone points out, like, no, that's complicated. And you're like, no, it's pretty simple. They're a narcissist. Like, no, it's not about whether it's true or not true or debatable or complicated means it entails a lot of information and a lot of connections. Simple means it doesn't. That's complicated. So when we're talking about it seems like everybody else is content or whatever, that's just because we think other people are simple and we're the complicated ones.
Yeah.
That's a cognitive bias called fundamental attribution error.
Hmm.
I'm complex, others are simple. When someone else yells, it's because they're a jerk. When I yell, it's because I am tired. And this is the 14th time that this has happened, and so on and so on and so on.
I gotta look back at those.
The flip side, by the way, that nobody ever when we talk about fundamental attribution error, that's always the example. It's how we're willing to judge other people as being bad and give ourselves a pass. But it's true in reverse too, and people never talk about this. Someone who is successful, well, they're successful because they're successful. They're smart. They're successful. That's just how they are. But when I am successful is because this person helped me, and I
Right.
happen to be in this spot at this time, and then we're all walking around being like, yeah, I mean, I know I've accomplished a lot, but only because of X, Y, and Z, not like
Right.
these other people, as though they don't have reasons behind it too.
That's so me.
It's again, all of us.
Oh, you're right. God, that's so funny. That's so funny.
Which again, that's fine. It's not about being right or wrong. We divide people into categories, like you said. It makes it simple. You, I once read someone say that like if you went to the grocery store bereft of all like categorizations, perceptual sets, like all the things that we're talking about that make it so that we miss details and get things wrong. If you were to do something like go to the grocery store without that, you would be overwhelmed with pure color and sound, unable to move. I mean, the closest we have to a human who does not have a way to categorize things neatly and quickly, which leaves them vulnerable to making mistakes, the closest examples we have of that are newborn babies.
Hmm.
And yeah, they're overwhelmed by everything all the time.
Hmm.
You've heard the thing like babies can only see 6 inches in front of their face. This is an example of one of those things. It's like we throw it around like it's simple and nobody really thinks about it, even though it's very complex. Because what do we really mean by that? Do we mean that like, because seeing something is a matter of light refracting, that's not the word, light bouncing off of something and into our pupils and
Hmm.
being, hitting the rods and cones in the back. So light that originates from farther than 6 inches away doesn't go through their pupils. Only light that, no, of course not. That's ridiculous. Of course, they see light from however far away we all do. What we're talking about is they don't focus, their eyes don't coordinate to focus on something unless it is 6 inches or closer. So that's what we're talking. We're talking about perception, not vision. That unless something is 6 inches or closer, the eyes don't focus, which tells us that it is not being treated as a distinct thing.
Hmm.
If you're looking at a visual field, like when you look at the stars in the sky at night, whatever, and you focus in on an individual star, then your
Hmm.
eyes converge to the extent of like the line of sight from those eyes connect on that point. But if you do what we call a soft focus, you're just looking at the whole thing. What that means is you're not treating any piece of that as being distinct from any other thing. So things that are farther than 6 inches away from a newborn baby is just all a blur. There's no ability to identify this is that, like separating noise from signal. And we say that as simply as they can only see 6 inches away. No, that's not.
I'm touching my head in anguish in something because I'm thinking about sometimes when I watch movies and I'm trying to have that soft focus, but the camera is leading my eyes in other places, and just I'm thinking about so much about how my eyes are being used. And I wish I was a baby, so I wasn't thinking about it.
Being a baby sucks, or would suck anyway. I don't remember it, but I wouldn't want to do it. Like, okay, I'm removing from you the ability to speak or understand language of any
Oh,
kind.
no.
I'm removing from you the ability to coordinate and move your body
Oh,
in
no.
any way in which it just randomly moves on its own. The muscles work, but you have no ability to like make them do a certain thing.
But Brandon, consciousness, not there. Great.
Yeah, well, that sure. I was going to say that is theoretically true of death as well. We can't know that. People obviously debate that, but there is a school of thought that consciousness ceases to exist after death, and it's a reasonable school of thought. Um, and that's the mistake that people make. They think that a lack of consciousness would be fundamentally and inevitably better than consciousness. This is, there's research on this as well. This is what we're talking about when we say that a person killing themselves
Mhm.
in a conscious effort to kill themselves is an attempt to better the experience for the self as opposed to end the self,
Mhm.
which if a person believes that after death there is no more experience, then that's a pretty fundamental flaw in the thinking there. Is like, oh, I'll be better off. No, if you don't exist, you won't exist. You won't be better off. And it would be hard to make the logical argument that non-existence is better than any form of existence in like a large scale way.
Mhm.
So this is like a weird thing about suicide is that
Mhm.
people who kill themselves do it in an effort to improve their conditions when it is possible that what it's doing, including that what many people think that it is doing, is ending those conditions, which can't be looked at logically as an improvement.
Mhm. Interesting.
It's the extension of when we say the mind would rather be dead than wrong. Because a lot of the time, the suffering that people are experiencing, the whole point of everything we're saying is that innumerable variables, like we cannot number all the variables, play into and impact everything that a person experiences. But some number of those variables are internal to the person, and some number of those variables are external to the person. What you feel is a result of a complex mishmash of things, but some of the things that play into that are things that are internal to you. Some of those things you have more of an ability to influence, some of those things you have less of an ability to influence. Mostly, though, when we're talking about more or less of an ability to influence, we're just time gating things. Like, I'm getting, I'm going to like oversimplify to make points, and then people will misinterpret or are more likely to misinterpret it. But whatever. Mostly people just want to do everything immediately.
Yep.
So when someone's like, I am not in control of X, Y, or Z, when they're talking about something internal to themselves,
Mhm.
what they mean is there's nothing I can do in the moment that will have an appreciable impact in that moment. I Let's take a simple example. I'm angry.
Mhm.
I am angry for all kinds of reasons. One
Okay.
of those, at least, is because the thing I'm angry about just happened. A person did the thing that I am angry about, and that's part of the reason that I am angry. I wouldn't be angry in this way if they hadn't done that thing. If I can identify, also, I haven't eaten anything in like 36 hours, then I can reach a reasonable conclusion that that might also be impacting my anger. And that if I were to go and eat something, my experience of anger might diminish or even evaporate completely. So, is it a true statement to say, like, look, a person can't just stop feeling angry? Yeah, generally, it is a true thing to say a person can't just stop feeling angry in the moment by just willing it to be so. Like,
Mhm.
now I'm done being angry. It is not a true statement to say that there's nothing that a person can do that might impact the extent to which they are feeling angry over time. But if something doesn't solve the problem completely and right away, we then disregard it as that doesn't work.
Mhm.
I tried using a planner and it didn't work, meaning it didn't solve the problem completely and immediately and permanently. But did it make any element of it any better? Maybe. But if
Mhm.
but I'm disregarding the whole thing as not working. So yeah, to some extent, we are just as like much of crybabies as some people want to make us all out to be, although generally people try to make other people out to be a crybaby, not themselves. That we're like, what it means to want something by definition is that you want it. You want all the things you want. Yep. That's not entitlement. That is the definition of what want means is to
Uh-huh.
want the thing.
Mhm.
But yeah, we are convinced, we've convinced each other and are continuing to convince ourselves that tomorrow doesn't exist or that if it does, it's not very important and that right now is what matters. And there are there are reasons for that, and good and useful and practical reasons. Things which are useful. When we attempt to use them past the limits of their utility, they can become harmful. That doesn't make it not useful. It just means that use of it is harmful.
Hmm.
If you if you try to use a hammer as a parachute, things are going to be really bad for you. That causes a problem. That doesn't mean that the hammer is a bad tool. It just means it's not for that. So when we try to use psychology and logic, and and by psychology here I mean psychoanalysis and logic and rationale, in order to solve our own unpleasant emotional experiences, depending on the context, the specific ways in which you're using it, sometimes that is trying to use a hammer as a parachute, and it's going to be really bad. That doesn't mean it's not useful in other ways, though.
Hmm.
It is much simpler to be able, literally the simplest. Okay, we'll do this. The least amount of resources that you can spend on something is to not know about the thing at all.
Hmm.
That's what each of us does with the vast majority of what exists in the universe. We just have no awareness of it because that's zero resources spent on it. If you are aware of something, in that case, the minimum resources you can spend on a thing is to be aware of it as a single static thing. This is what it is. It's just one version of it. That's what it is. It's what it always is. It's simple. The next more complex step, which requires more resources, is to be like, okay, well, sometimes it's this other thing. Sure, sometimes it's day, sometimes it's night. There's two things now. If we can go further and be like, well, exactly when do we say night becomes day and there's this twilight and, what are we talking about here? But it costs more, right? To be aware of three options, four or five. The more permutations, the more possible versions of the thing that you become aware of, the more it's costing you to be aware of those things. And we can't be aware of everything, and we don't have the ability to spend every cost. So we're trying our best to figure out, like, yeah, it's not really, night and day is good enough for me. There has not been any experiences in my life that I have been able to identify as like, this would have gone better if I had a more nuanced understanding of the transition from daytime to nighttime.
I
Like
don't know,
those two
man.
things, fine.
Sometimes I'm like, late afternoon. What does that mean? What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? Like that's why we start to get a little more complex into, evening, morning, afternoon, evening. Well, morning, late morning, afternoon, early evening, like we do. And that's fine. But the point is that we want everything to be simple because we have finite resources.
Right.
I could be getting more complexity and nuance about this thing that I'm interacting with on a regular basis, and that having more information and more detail and experience might help me to do some stuff. But if I have to instead like spend some resources on learning about a third option for this other thing, like, oh man, I don't want to have to learn more about high LI. I don't really care that much about it.
It makes me think of talking to you or being a therapist and having people get specific. And I'm like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
That's so much work.
Just tell me what to do so that everything will be the way I want it to be
Yep.
forever.
Yep.
And whatever it is you tell me to do, make it something that I can do like right away, not like something I have to keep doing forever and ever. But if you want to like be healthy, you have to engage in hygiene practices you just have to do the same stuff over and over and over, literally every day. When do I get to
Boring.
stop? Never, never.
Boring.
Yeah, it is boring. It is. Maintenance is boring. You want to know what's boring? A stable, safe, healthy relationship. Boring as hell. There's a reason that we use the word drama to refer to times of interpersonal tension and heightened emotional stakes. It's interesting. It calls our attention. What we are aiming for is to make it so my relationship with my wife and my children is boring, really boring. Not to me, I enjoy it. It's meaningful to me, but it would be boring to anybody else. There's no good play to write about my family life. Nobody goes to see a play about like, oh, these people do more or less the same thing pretty much every day. The end. No, you go when it's the drama, when someone's dying, when somebody's leaving, when somebody's Stories, the things we find most interesting as a rule, are the things which are least likely to match reality.
Mm-hmm.
Because we see reality all the time. We don't need to see more of that for entertainment purposes. But I love it. I love coming home every day to the same four people that I love and engaging with them in the same ways that I enjoy. And of course, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we argue or don't get along or hurt each other's feelings or accidentally physically hurt each other or, I mean, no human beings in the world have ever caused me as much physical pain as my three children through accidental kids crawling into your lap. They don't know about elbows being like, one of my sons uses his chin as like a way to get more purchase and move up further. Yeah, boring is not bad. And people sometimes make the mistake of thinking that boring is bad. They want everything to be interesting, which is fine. You can't actually accomplish that because interesting is about what you're paying attention to. You can only pay attention to so much. But we all want more. Everybody wants more. You want to be able to do more, have more, be more. And I don't mean greed, more money, more that, just more. Man, everything that you think of, that I think of, anything that any person would think of as like, this is a good and valuable and noble thing, is still more of just of whatever thing you're talking about. We always want that. That's part of what it is to be a conscious human being. And if you want to be happy and effective, and to me, effective, part of the reason I have it in the title of our practice, Effective Artistry, is about being impactful in sustainable and directed ways. Being powerful is just the ability to make a change. You can make a change happen. But effective is about making changes that are the changes that you want them to be, that result in other changes, that you do one thing and then as the automatic results of that one thing over the next 20 years, it's all the stuff that you would want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
To do that requires that you balance now against later, that you balance doing the boring and scary and difficult things that are worth it and identifying which boring and scary and difficult things are not worth doing and shifting those resources elsewhere. Like there is it is not a game that you win. This is just an experience. It is never done until it's done, and we don't want that to happen.
When you say scary and difficult things, what do you mean?
Oh, any kind of a thing. We could use different. Give me a problem that you hear people talk about. Point out what.
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
Telling people what you think about them
mm-hmm.
when you think that what you think about them is something they wouldn't like for you to be thinking about them. That's scary.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that it's always worth doing. I'm saying you identify when it's worth doing and when it isn't. Sometimes there's risk of harm to yourself or to them. Sometimes it just doesn't really, even though it's low stakes and there's not really much risk to it, it's also just not worth it. It's a person you passed by in the street. Who cares what you think of them? But then we take these things and we want things to be simple. So something which it's kind of like if somebody learned, 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, cool. What's 2 + 3? 4. That was the right answer to the first math question. So the answer to math questions is 4. Like, no,
Mm-hmm.
you've generalized this too much. There's more detail. That's what we do. We generalize. We take something that works in one context, and then when another context comes along, we're like, I don't know what this is, but it's similar to this other one in some way. So let me just treat it as though it's the same. And a lot of the time that works great. So I'm going to treat all these things as though they're the same thing. Sometimes we treat it as though it's the same. It does not work well for us. And that's when we want to adapt. But people get stuck in this binary of, oh, it didn't work this time. That means I've been doing it wrong all the time. Like, no, it works. Sometimes it doesn't. This is just a different thing that's different in some ways that make it so that it doesn't work. So we judge things really quickly. So if I
Mm-hmm.
say something, if I were to talk with this level of nuance and complexity and detail in a random conversation, that would be so annoying for most people.
But you do
So
it.
I do it when people are interested in it.
Yeah,
You don't really see me in any other context. So I
that's
can tell
true.
you confidently that like I'm hanging out with members of my wife's family. I'm not talking about all this stuff. It's not of interest to them.
What are you talking about then? I can't imagine you in any other way but this. Like
Yeah,
you just talk about
we,
food
we
and you
make
just
things simple, right? Like, so this is the version of me that you interact with and observe. So that becomes in your mind the only version of me that exists. And so then the thought that I might talk like this about what food we're eating or whatever, it's like, oh my gosh, how pedantic and picky.
I
The
can't
idea that I
imagine
might correct people's grammar and stuff.
just for you to be like, oh yeah, this tastes really good, or like, the simplicity I cannot fathom.
Believe it or not, I do say that. In fact, pretty much every time somebody else makes food, I don't lie. If I think it tastes bad, I don't say it tastes good, but I say, this is great, thank you.
And then that's it.
Mm.
And then you just shut up.
Yeah, I have never once, when someone's like, can I do X? I've never once been like, you mean may you do X? Like, no, sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't. But we're looking for ways to dismiss things because if some new idea is actually relevant to something that I'm experiencing that I want to be different, some problem I'm having, then oh my gosh, to spend the resources to like incorporate this new concept and explore how it might play out or it might impact things or what things I can do off it. That's a lot. So I really want to make sure that it's worth doing before I take it for that. So I'm looking for anything that allows me to be like, no, that's wrong. I don't need to listen to that because then I don't have to spend all those resources. I'm instead going to spend those resources continuing to try and find something until something comes across that I can't dismiss as being wrong.
Mm,
We can't know what's right. We can only identify that something is wrong. So we're trying to identify if something is wrong. And yeah, we do things, including stuff that's cognitive biases, the appeal to authority fallacy and whatever, like, oh, that person has no degrees. Therefore, what they're saying has nothing to no value, no merit.
for things that are wrong, but is there such thing as wrong?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Well, there's such a thing as right too. These are concepts, right? These are things that we have identified so we can define what they are because that's what they are, is what we've defined them to be. We just can't ever know whether something is right, but we can know whether it's wrong.
Okay.
Meaning, let's take it in like, I want to make the right choice. I want to
Hmm.
do the right thing. I want to know what's the right answer. What we mean there is, what is the thing that if I do that thing, everything that happens afterwards that is impacted by that choice goes the way I would want it to go.
Hmm.
Like I want to pick the right person. I want to make sure I marry the right person. What we mean by that is I want to marry a person where then the rest of my life with them, I know there'll be ups and downs, but like generally it all goes the way I would want it to go.
Hello.
So yeah, I, it's okay. I'm doing the stream. I'm not in the session, so I'll be in a different room when I'm doing sessions. You need confidentiality so people can't come in. So you think somebody's the right person to marry, and you get married, and then it's great. You love it. It's wonderful. Was that the right choice? Well, what if things go bad later? It could be wonderful for 10 years. Then what if things go bad? Like at no point can you say, yep, this will never go in a way I don't want it to go.
This is also stressful.
Yes, it is. But when it goes wrong, you can know that. Oh, that didn't work out the way I wanted it to. That was the wrong choice. So wrong is something that you can like, I know it's wrong. Right? You can't know because until you die, like it could always go wrong later.
I feel like I don't know. Everything can go wrong. Like
Yes.
I feel like it's a
That's what it means to make the right choice, is to make a choice that results in nothing going wrong. Because there's nothing to observe to
it's
identify.
impossible.
What's that?
It's impossible
Yeah.
to.
Well, it's impossible to know. Theoretically, you can do that, right? Theoretically, you do something and everything after that works out the way you would want it to do. You could just never know if that's the case. So when you're focused on trying to do the right thing, make the right choice, what you're doing is trying to identify, is there something about this that is wrong? if you're trying to have a correct understanding or get the right idea, what you're doing is evaluating, is there anything in this that I can point at and be like, oh, that's wrong? And if not, then it's right. If tomorrow somebody points something out to me and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. Okay, that's wrong. I thought it was right until it was proven to me that it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing that you think is right is just the thing that hasn't been proven to be wrong yet.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, that's really stressful, very stressful. That's why generally it's not a concept that is very useful in these kinds of things. But
I
when
really don't
people,
like this.
yeah, no, it's really good though for some things. Like, what's the right amount of eggs to put into this recipe? Because like then the recipe will be done and it's done. Like things that are time bound. They're like we're just doing a thing and it'll be done. And so if it all went the way I wanted it to go, if the cake comes out the way I wanted it to come out and we enjoy it, that was the right number of eggs. That's useful. But when I try to apply that same thing to like these larger, what's the right person to marry or the right career for me or whatever, then that causes a problem.
So what's a different question to ask instead?
Well, it depends on the specific thing. That's the whole point. Anything that could replace right, what's the right move? As a one-for-one swap, it replaces all the value. Would just be it would have the exact same problems as that. The whole problem with that is that it is too generic in order to be able to accomplish too many things. You have to be more specific. But some general thoughts is, for things that are about your experience, you look for like, are things going the way that I would want them to go or not? Am I willing to commit to this thing without knowing how things will work out?
Mm-hmm.
That especially with the like, is this the right person to marry or the right job to take or the right next step for me or whatever, the right house to buy? What you're really asking is like, in this moment, based on the information I have, do I have enough information? And the information I have is such that I am confident to say like, yeah, this seems like a good shot. Not 100%, but like, a reasonable, I'm going to commit to this thing enough that I'm going to say that when problems pop up, I'm not going to just bail on it. I'm going to try, I'm going to try and work on it and improve it and make it more what I want it to be, knowing that it could be that at a certain point enough problems have popped up that I'm eventually going to say like, nope, I made the wrong call. Let me do something different.
Mm-hmm.
The ship of Theseus, this
Mm-hmm.
thought experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So right now, there's not a single cell in your body that existed 7 years ago.
Okay.
The longest lived cells in our body live for 7 years before being replaced, dying. Like the top layer of your skin dies and the new.
Sure.
All body systems are like that. So that's the reason for like the ship of Theseus thought experiment is like, what is identity? It's not a question of are you? That's a given.
Right.
We're talking about what do we mean by that? What is identity? It's not about the component pieces, obviously. Is it about the way in which they're arranged? Well, the shape of your body and whatever change. Is it just a conceptual thing that because we have identified this as being the same as it was before, then that's what it means? And yeah, it's something along those lines. You can debate specifics, but something in that direction. All this to say, in what world do you imagine that you or anybody else could predict? If you could know what you're going to want 5 years from now, then why not just play the lottery? Like if you can predict the future. So it's not to say like, here's the right way to predict the future. Here's the better thing. It's just to say you can try and pretend like you are predicting the future. If you think that it's important and you think that it is possible, then you will either feel bad about your failure to do it, or you will construct narratives for yourself that allow you to think of yourself as having done it. And either of those things is going to cause you problems because no matter what narrative you have, it didn't actually make you predict the future. So the point is that that's not a very good way to make decisions. What's that?
I'm having trouble understanding that last.
Say more.
I don't know. I right now my brain feels like half of it is like faded and the other one's really trying to focus. So the last sentence you
Yeah,
said, I'm
this
struggling.
is the kind of thing where I'm going to say this, and it quite likely will sound pedantic as though it's the same as me being like, well, may you, not can you. But you're not talking about your brain. Your brain is not a thing that is or feels focused. And I'm being pedantic about some of these things because, as we talk about all the time, language. Language is the secret. Everything is about meaning. If you think of something as being a bad thing to do, then you will think and feel and behave as though that thing is a bad thing to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so people are looking at, how do I change my thoughts? How do I become more confident in myself and increase my self esteem and whatever? You don't change your thoughts by thinking about them. In very rare edge cases, you can make very small changes to the way that you think about things. Let me say that differently. It is very rare that there is something you have wanted to think differently about for some period of time, and then you can find a new way to think that will change it. We do change our thinking all the time, but when it works almost instantaneously. So if there's any thought that you have been struggling with and wanting to change for a day or more, very, very unlikely that any new thought will change that. But new language can.
Okay. Help me with the new language for what I just said.
You're talking about you, not your brain.
Okay.
Half of me is focused, half of me is fading. Because when we do that, when people, I just read, these like BuzzFeed things, right? Like, we asked people whatever, and here are the quotes. And I just read this one that was like, what are the habits? What are the things that you do repeatedly that cause you problems or whatever, or that you wish you hadn't, or, and probably about how, and these are these little snippets of like what people are putting on Facebook, whatever. And some of them are just like having a glass of wine every night, end of story, right? But a lot of them have an extra sentence or an extra clause where they're saying things like, I do X and I'm completely powerless to stop it, which is useful because people have been telling that person, or they've been getting the impression some way, somehow, that they could just stop it by willing it to stop. And that hasn't been working. It's been making them feel bad. And in order to not feel bad, they then think, well, I can't. When they could, at least theoretically, change it, but not by willing it, not by thinking certain thoughts at it.
Mhm.
But if you change the ways you talk about it, if you change the structure of your life, if you change things, and we have limitations, changing things has a cost, and we can only afford what we can afford. Anyway, if we start to talk about things like that, my brain makes me blank blank. Well, what are you supposed to do about that?
It's like
So you're just,
when people
but
say like my ADHD right now.
hmm,
Like when people say, "Oh, my ADHD right now is going crazy."
yeah,
Is that like another example of
yes,
saying my
that
brain
it
is
has utility is not wrong or bad. I'm not correcting people because they've gotten it factually incorrect.
Mhm.
That's not how any of these are not factual. These discussions are not discussions in which fact play a role. They cannot be found to be factual or not factual. People just mistake fact for truthful and
Yeah.
take that for helpful or whatever. Anyway, it's useful in some ways. In the same way that a person saying, I'm powerless to do anything about it, it is likely useful because they were trying to do something that wasn't working and was just making things worse. And now that they have thought of themselves and talk about themselves as being powerless to do anything about it, the behavior is still happening, but they're not doing that extra stuff to try and get themselves to stop that wasn't working and was just making things worse, like
Mhm.
feeling extra bad about it or beating themselves up about it or whatever, right? So useful, but useful things have limitations. And one of the limitations here is the utility in thinking of myself as powerless is now something that also means that I have to continue the behavior because I'm powerless. There's nothing I can do about it. And even if I did think of something that I could do about it and did it and it worked, now I'm going to have to go back and be like, so I wasn't powerless that whole time. I could have done something about it.
Mm-hmm.
Anthropomorphizing the brain is understandable. We do this with all kinds of body parts. We talk about our heart and our gut and, you know, whatever. But it has the veneer of science and fact on it now,
Mm-hmm.
to the extent that even like very respected people and institutions talk about it as though it is literally just fact that your brain makes you do X, Y, or Z, when it is not. That is not how it works. But we talk about it with the same certainty that if you went to a culture, you know, Western European culture 1,000 years ago, we talk about the brain now with the same certainty that people then would have been like, well, God said this and that, you know, like that's just how it is. Things are bad because the king is being disobeyed or whatever, you know, like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a little bit like person first language, you know, a person with autism saying it that way as person first language as opposed to an autistic person. Even if you believe that it is a nice thing to do, the reason that you believe that it is a nice thing to do is because you think the thing itself is bad. So you're trying to distance.
The modern god is the brain.
Hi, Caitlin. Uh, well, to some extent, yeah. That opens up a whole conversation too, but I gotta get going.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Um, Control is a binary. You either have it or you don't. And if you have control, then you have total control. It just is what you want it to be. So if things aren't what you want it to be, but it's something that's in your control, like you're in control, you can't control other people, but you can control how you respond to them. Well, then what if you respond to them differently than you would want to? What if you get angry and you don't want to get angry? Either that means you're broken, there's something wrong with you, and you're not in control the way that other people are, or you secretly do want to get angry, even though you consciously don't,
Mm-hmm.
in some way that we can't observe or define, but you know, you did want it because it's definitely true that it's in your control and therefore whatever you're doing is what you wanted. Even if it's not what you wanted, it is what you wanted because by definition, that's what it is. It's in your control. And something which is out of your control, there's just nothing you can do about it. So why even bother trying? But if we talk about influence, talk about language changes, why I talk about changing language. If we talk about influence, I have some influence over it. Some things I have more influence, some things I have less influence, and that impacts how much it's worth trying to do something. I influence the way in which I respond to people, and I have a lot more influence over the way in which I respond to people than I do over the way in which they behave. But I don't have no influence on the way people treat me. I have
Mm-hmm.
some. And what are we saying? That you shouldn't think about or try or explore like the things that you could do to influence the way people treat you? Just ignore that entire category?
No.
Because people do too much, they do more, you know, like that's not helping and whatever. But then in order to get them to stop, we just have to say that's a bad thing, don't do it. In fact, the only reason you're doing it is because you're deficient, you're a people pleaser, as opposed to no, that's a useful thing to do, you're doing it to an extent that isn't useful. They're like, no, it's not that some things are good to do and some things are bad to do. Things are useful in the ways in which they're useful. Not everything is useful, but anything that is useful to the extent that it is. It doesn't make it perfect. How about this? In a given day, in terms of like if we're going to say from, you know, start every time you feel anxious, we start a timer.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you stop feeling anxious, we stop the timer
Mm-hmm.
and then start it again. You know, it just adds on cumulatively throughout the day. How how much time would we have to accumulate on that timer for you to then walk away and be like, I was really anxious yesterday?
Oh gosh.
2
I
minutes, 10 minutes, half hour? I'll tell
uh
you this, it's
50%.
not 18 hours. It's definitely not that because no one ever has experienced that. So that would be useless.
18 hours? No one's
Yeah,
experienced.
it's not the whole day. to every moment of that time is a moment that you're saying, in this moment right now, I am feeling this thing I call anxiety.
Maybe. Why not, Brandon?
Um, the amount of energy that it would require to be able to do that is um, absurd, impossible. Like to some extent, what we're talking about when we say anxiety is my heart is racing and
Hmm.
my breathing is shallow. No, you're not doing that for 18 hours in a day. That's you literally don't have enough adrenaline supplies in your body to do that for an entire day, every
I'd
single
probably be
moment.
asleep during the parts.
Well, and that's the thing. It's definitely not 24 hours a day because you're not asleep or you're not anxious when you're asleep. You can say, no, I'm even anxious when I'm asleep, but then what are we talking about? You're just constructing a narrative where you're saying, like, whatever it is I'm defining as anxiety is a thing that continues despite the fact that I am not actively experiencing it.
It
Which,
infiltrates
okay.
into dreams. What
And
are
you dream for the entire time that you're asleep and you remember all of those
no,
confidently.
no.
So what that reveals then, if somebody says that, is what you're saying is that everything you are experiencing is impacted by whatever it is that you're calling anxiety. And I'm willing to believe that, but that's a very different statement.
Sure. Okay.
And that then, okay, what is the impact? And what other things, if it has an impact, other things are having an impact. No matter how depressed you are, even if you are depressed every single moment of the day, you're not the exact same level of depressed
Right.
every moment of the day. So
Right.
other things impact it and make it better or worse. Is that to say it's all under your control and you can just shake it off and be happy? And no, of course not. That's absurd. And yes, people say that, like, oh, you just got to choose to be happy, like as though all people would not at all times be choosing to be. If that's just a thing, you can be like, what do I want right now? Again, happy by definition is the thing that you want. That's what it means to be happy, is you are experiencing what you want to be experiencing. So no, just choose to be happy. No.
I hate that artwork. Choose happy.
Well, choose happy, I actually would parse differently than choose to be happy.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Why? How?
I would interpret that as prioritize things which make you happy,
Okay.
as opposed to through force of will, cause yourself to feel happiness in this moment.
Okay.
But I don't know, other people might interpret it differently. And I want to say that, like, to some extent, this wasn't the intent, but I'm realizing that what I'm saying is kind of subtweeting like the let them philosophy that's very popular right now. And that's not intentional, but I'm aware of it at this point. And I'll say everything that is useful within the limits of its utility. Absolutely, it is helpful to people, to some people, not every person. To some people, it is helpful to shift their thinking into like, well, just let them do what they want, whatever. I don't need to worry about it. But obviously, that is not a thing that applies to all situations.
Hmm.
Nor is it a thing that even if it would theoretically be helpful, you can just change by wishing it to be so. Nobody thinks that you can just have $1 million deposited in your bank account by thinking about it really hard. Why anyone thinks that you could like feel X, Y, or Z thing or do X, Y, or Z thing by thinking about it really hard. I was going to say it baffles me, but that's for dramatic effect. I understand why people think that. It's if every time X happens, I do Y and things go well, then when something happens, if it looks like X, I'm going to do Y. Sometimes something happens and I perceive it, it seems to me like it's X or close enough that it's basically X, but it's different in some significant ways that matter. And I do Y and it doesn't work. So anytime we were saying things like that, like why people would do this, it baffles me. It's because it works to do that thing in many, many, many cases. And this was a case where it was identified by the person as being another time that it would work. And they just got it wrong that time. The only really like, we got to wrap up and I was trying to find a button, but I want to be precise. The place where we're going to tend to focus so much in therapy and in any effective, sustainable version of like self improvement, things that you're doing to make your life more the way you want it to be. Where you really want to go focus is that, yes, very narrow window of like, where is it worth putting resources to making this change? There's a lot outside of that window. What it is, the human experience happens in a very narrow window. So even though it's a narrow window, there's a lot of impact we can have in this little, ultimately kind of microscopic thing of like, anyway, the point I was trying to get to without then being all precise is where I really want to put the focus is on how many times do we do Y in response to what we think of as X and it doesn't go well. How many times do we do that before we recognize that even though we thought it's X, it must not be? And narratives are the thing that allow us to be like, no, no, that's X and Y should work. And Y isn't working because, and then we construct narratives that allow us to not ever have to go back and be like, no, obviously this is not X. It's different from X in some meaningful way. And what I want to do for myself and what I help people do in my work with them is to be like, let's do that like once, maybe twice at most, before we're like, okay, I was wrong. It's not X. I see why I thought it was. I can understand why I interpreted it that way, why I thought it was a thing where this would apply or whatever. But obviously, that's why one of my favorite questions is, how's that working out for you?
Mm-hmm.
You can make any logical argument you want to me about like, this is how it should go. Did it go that way? Because if not, then obviously you're missing something.
Mm-hmm.
Embrace being wrong, embrace being limited. That's how you can make things better and be happy. As long as you're thinking someday I will be insanely rich, then you're going to make decisions that are suboptimal in any other context than the one in which you do end up becoming rich someday. So if you keep thinking someday I will overcome all of my limitations and I will be capable of doing everything and feeling everything that I want, then you're going to be making a lot of decisions that are suboptimal because that's not going to happen. It sucks that you're limited and finite and that you're going to die someday. That all sucks. But it's going to happen, or at least to the best of our knowledge, it's going to happen. I mean, you can make all kinds of what I would say are generally pedantic philosophical arguments about the nature of knowledge. But for practical purposes, yeah, you're limited, you're finite, you're going to die someday. So make decisions based around that rather than thinking of it as like, no, 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 I'll figure out how to change that later. So I don't need to deal with it. All right. I appreciate you keeping your eyes open for this entire time. I think it's become more of an effort over the last 20 minutes, especially.
Dude, these last 20 minutes have been rough for me.
I can tell. I wish you had said something, but that's all right. I'm not.
I mean, I did. And then you kept talking about the brain or how it wasn't my brain and how it was me. And I'm like, he's doing something to try and be effective here. And so I'm just going to listen.
Of course I am. But whether or not I'm trying to be effective is different from whether I am being effective. And how many times is it worth trying something?
But Brendan, remember, it costs resources to say I'm sleepy and my eyes are closing. So I didn't want to spend those
resources to keep those eyes open.
It does.
It would be one thing if you had just fallen asleep. Then I would be like, oh, if you had just fallen asleep without saying it, I'd be like, oh, that's the easier way to go. I'm pretty sure it would have been less costly to say it than to keep yourself awake for 20 minutes. But I don't know.
Who knows? Who's to say?
Exactly. It's good to be with you.
You too. See you later. Bye.